Word. Okay, thanks for being here, everybody. So this is a meeting of the Housing Element Advisory Committee for Pacific Grove. So semi-public meeting, it's by invite. And this is, I'll review the purpose of this group. And we've got a lot of material to walk through today. So I'm going to get started. I am going to share my screen. This one. Let's see, slideshow. Okay, so it's February 6th. Happy February. Here's the material, that's the topics we're going to go through today. Want to do a quick overview of the input we heard through the Balancing Act tool in particular, but also just a summary of sort of key themes from the outreach, which are very important in terms of informing the updated housing element. Just a real quick overview of how the housing element is structured in terms of the document and the key components of it, some of the big ideas that are in there. And then mostly we're going to focus in on the sites inventory, which is kind of the biggest piece of it all, where we're looking at making changes to zoning in particular areas. And it's not up to this point in the process, we've really kind of talked about sort of areas of town, and now we're going to be down to listing specific properties that we anticipate will redevelop with housing, and just talk through each of the areas and what properties we're identifying in the draft element, and just have some opportunity for some feedback from all of you. And then talk about the schedule going forward in terms of release of the public review draft of the element and what the steps in the process are leading up to adoption by December of this year. December 15th is our target date. So yeah, anything that's not on there, I do have in my head, it's not on the list here. There's some questions about what's called the builder's remedy, which really relates to that deadline and what happens if you don't have a element that's in substantial compliance by the deadline. We can talk through that as we get into that schedule conversation. But anything else that's front of mind for folks that you want to make sure we consider and add to in the agenda today? I'm just going to ask you to unmute and speak up, because with my sharing the screen, I can't see all of you. Okay.
David,
Yeah.
it's Claudia. I have a number of questions. Do you want me to go through all of them right now, or do you want me to wait?
Do they fall into these categories, or is there things?
They'll fall under different categories.
Okay.
But I'll ask the first one because I think you'll probably be addressing that. When will we see the housing element report? Are we expecting that sort of mid-November?
We're shooting for a public review draft in March. So March. We're back and forth with staff right now on an admin draft. Yeah. And that starts the clock ticking. So
okay.
Yeah.
Will we do any sort of public hearing during this draft period if we have questions, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, we're planning to do, it could be in the form of a public hearing, it could be a workshop that's hosted by the Planning Commission or Council, just to provide something that's a little less formal in terms of not doing like a 3-minute per person kind of approach. But we can talk about that in the review process towards the end. But yeah, so we're planning to do a in-person and an online opportunity for verbal comments, and then of course people can also submit written comments during the 30-day period.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go on. I'm just going to ask for a quick round of introductions, and I'm going to stop sharing screen so I can actually see you all. It makes it a lot easier. Just quick who you are and any affiliation if you have one, and then also a 2023 housing resolution that you have. This is along the lines of New Year's resolutions. I'm just dropping my screens here. So let's I'm just going to call you out as I see you on my screen. Mike Gibbs.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Gibbs. I'm newly appointed to the PG Economic Development Commission, and which I appreciate the mayor for making. And my housing resolution is to make PG more affordable for young people who are starting businesses and entrepreneurs that want to move here and make PG a more vibrant business community. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Claudia,
Hi, I'm Claudia Sawyer and I'm on the Planning Commission for Pacific Grove, and I couldn't figure out how to put that title on there. And my housing resolution is, I really want to see how we're going to connect the focus general plan with our housing element and make it so that it's synchronized. Thank you.
thanks. Don Murphy,
My name is John Murphy. I'm on the Planning Commission, and I'm determined to help promote affordable housing in the city.
John Path,
And I'm not on any commission, and really just continuing to look at affordable housing as a resident of PG.
great. Peggy Gibbs, yeah, I can see your mouth moving, but you're still muted.
Thanks. I'm not on any commission, but I'm an interested community member and have been following the various meetings that started first with Anastasia and have continued on, and just want to continue to be educated and informed.
Great, thanks, Peggy. Andrew,
My name is Andy Kubica, and I'm newly appointed to the Planning Commission, and I'm interested in how housing is going to affect PG and how to do the best job we can to meet the arena numbers.
excellent. Welcome aboard. Sarah,
Hi, I'm Sarah Boyle. I sit on the Architectural Review Board, and I am just hoping that we can figure out a way to make PG more affordable for young families in particular.
great. Jay Gentry. Up, you're muted, Jay. I do it all the time. You're still muted.
Sorry. I live in PG, have for a couple of years. I am on the board of Passive House California. I'm semi-retired, and that's what I spend most of my time working on. And my resolution or my hope for the year is that we do get to move forward on something from ADUs to small multifamily to large multifamily, and that we build them to the standard, design and build them to the standard that is much more energy efficient, much better indoor air quality, and resilient, because we can do that with little or no aesthetic compromise, and also little or no extra expense. But it's way better and for particularly affordable folks because of the health impacts and the stepping over the fuel poverty.
Right. Thanks, Jay. Catherine.
Hi there, Catherine Avila with Avila Construction. I work on the not really construction part of construction within the company. I do permitting and entitlements and financing for development. So let's see, housing goal for the year, I guess. I'm attending a lot of policy related meetings like this one for various jurisdictions. And I'd really like to see us, what I'm calling, just get out of our own way when it comes to housing. I think we've found lots of barriers to put up over the years as, zoning codes have come to be and have been modified. And it's time to try to figure out how we can break down those barriers and increase housing production and do it with less cost, less time, less risk.
Right. Thanks, Catherine. Jane Barr.
Hello, I'll give you a quick, this is why I'm not on video. I'm going to turn it off after this, but I'm in bed, recuperating from Achilles tendon surgery. So happy to join today. And my resolution for the year is to get at least one more, if not more, new developments going in Monterey County, as well as see if we could move our projects along in Pacific Grove as far as increasing the number of units at our current property at Cypress. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jane. That's dedication.
Yes.
Rosemarie.
Hi. I don't know why my picture isn't there, but just as well. So resolutions for the year in terms of housing. Well, I've joined the committee on housing that's newly formed at COPA, Community and Partnership for Relational Power. And I'm in COPA, and so I think I can bring something to the committee just from the things I've learned here. And my resolution in terms of housing and PG is I would love to see us to do some workforce housing available for the many people that commute an hour and a half, 2 hours or more every day to work in PG. And I would like for it to be focused on low income people. We did something a few years ago with Pacific Grove, and it bordered on PG, and there was a lot of support for it happening, and it did happen. But when it came down to it, the number of people that it helped who were really low income, because they made it very broad in terms of the number of people that could be housed there. And I was thinking some of their managers, would be eligible to live there. That's because it takes so much to live in Pacific Grove. And they have need for workforce housing even at Pebble Beach. So yeah. I'd love to see workforce housing happening, and I'd love to see a real campaign to get people to consider doing ADUs, and for the city to do everything that they could to see that once people were moving in that direction, that they handheld their hands until it happened. They could see possibilities and would let them know companies that are good at this and companies who can do it in less than 2 or 3 years because there aren't enough construction workers, etc. So those are my goals on this committee. I'm so grateful to be around people that know so much about housing. I remember just reading about, who is this Catherine Avila? I don't recognize that name. And then hearing what she does. Isn't that incredible to have her on our committee? And that large construction companies are considering people like this as part of the staff. So anyway, thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for being here, Rosemarie. Appreciate it. Jan Lindenthal Cox.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jan. I am a 20-year resident of Pacific Grove and a 30-year career in affordable housing. And I'm also a leader with COPA. So Rosemarie, I hope to see you at our meeting. I hope to see you at our meeting tonight.
I will be with Jackie.
So Barbara Meister and I are co-chairing COPA's Housing Element Task Force working group. And the whole point of that is to organize ourselves within our COPA institutions to be able to support the housing element process that's going on in our communities. And I just have to say, as an affordable housing professional, as a member of the Welcome Home Task Force and a resident of PG, I tell everyone I know how proud I am of my hometown and the job that we're doing on our housing element. So my resolution for 2023 is to get all of my friends and family who live in Pacific Grove to support the work that that the city's doing on this housing element.
Yay.
Thank you. Gabriel Sanders.
Yep, that's my name. I'm Gabriel Sanders. I work for Landwatch as the deputy director. My focus is on our housing policy initiatives. So we've been working with jurisdictions across Monterey County, including Pacific Grove, basically as early as possible, starting last year on their housing element updates, trying to collaborate to find policies that work to help them meet their RHNA goals and comply with state housing law. And fortunately, we have firms like David's and city staff like Anastasia to lead the efforts. basically, the collaborative spirit is at the center of my work, trying to find ways to work with people like everyone in this room to find solutions. So here to support solutions to the housing problems that we've all become all too familiar with.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for being here. Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm off camera today, a bit under the weather, but wanted to be sure to make this call. Name's Elizabeth. I'm the Housing and Sustainability Policy Manager at Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. Just been following what's been going on in the housing element world since last year, and more so last week when the Bay Area's deadline took place. So my resolution for this year is really just to see housing elements in Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties through. All of the work is starting, so a very exciting time, and really just with the end resolution to make housing more affordable for everyone in our communities, but really those that, as many people have said on this call, have to travel an hour or so to get to their workplaces. Really just think it's the right thing to do to build housing where people work and live and send their kids to school. So glad to be here.
Thanks for being here, even if you're not feeling well, and I hope you feel better soon. And last but certainly not least, Elisa Kroger.
Morning, everybody. Alyssa Kroger. I am on the steering committee of the Home Collaborative, Housing Options Meaningful to Elders. And I'm also on the leadership council of the Continuum of Care for both Monterey and San Benito counties. And I echo everyone's sentiment here. And ultimately, my resolution is to see more housing come online in 2023 and to see compliant housing elements submitted in a timely manner.
Great. Thanks for being here. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Josh Ellsworth and Victor Tran. You guys want to say a quick hi?
Hello.
Hello. Josh Ellsworth, associate with Baird Community Planning Collaborative, formerly Baird Driscoll. Happy to be here and listen to everyone's wishes for housing. This is great.
Same. Associate here taking notes.
So Victor and Josh have been helping a lot, pull together a lot of the information we're going to be flying through today. And I just want to, so we changed our name effective January 1st, Community Planning Collaborative. We were Baird and Driscoll Community Planning. We're the same group doing the same work, but with the retirement of my colleague, Jeff Baird, we decided to take on a new name. And Anastasia, you're the last one who hasn't introduced. Do you want to say hi and any wise words to share before we dive in?
No, just appreciate seeing everybody here today. And as always, very grateful for the expertise and commitment of this group. Jane and in her trying to keep her foot up and still be on the meeting. Thank you. And Elizabeth, sorry you're not feeling well. And I hope everybody has a healthy and great start to the new year. And just really, like I said, grateful to continue to collaborate and work with this amazing group of people. And of course, housing preservation is a big deal for PG, preserving affordable units. And also just, I hope we get to a very compliant housing element. So I'm very grateful we have Baird and Driscoll, Community Planning Collaborative. I have to say the name. I have to get it. It's the first time I've said it out loud. So glad to have you all here, and Victor and Josh to help us get through this process, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing screen. Let's see, just to quickly, the purpose of this group is to bring folks who have a lot of knowledge, who are involved in housing issues, involved in city policy making, involved in supporting people with special housing needs or building housing, to give us some guidance, staff and ourselves as the consultant, as we develop the draft element. So it's not a decision-making body. We're not going to be taking votes on anything. This is really a feedback loop for us to help understand sort of where things, how people are going to respond to potential ideas we're putting out there. Just in terms of the meeting itself, just really want to encourage, I think you're all pretty great at voicing your views, and we want to hear those. We also want to make sure we hear from everybody. So just as we go through, I'm going to, if I haven't heard from people, I might call on you and ask you to tell us what you're thinking. But yeah, just sort of be respectful that we don't expect this to be a place we're going to make consensus decisions or anything. So if you hear a difference of opinion, listen with the aim of understanding why people think what they think, and then sharing your view respectfully as well. I'm going to jump in. So wanted to just go through quickly a summary of what we heard. And to start that off, just talk a little about who we heard from. So let's see, I'm going to go to, that'll be easier to read. So we did the community workshop on October 6th, where we actually did sort of a live go through of the Balancing Act tool. And then we had the Balancing Act tool up through most of November. So we had about 132, well, not about, we had actually 132 participants who submitted 135 plans. So some people submitted more than once. We think that was probably because they were at the workshop, and then they also went and did it online. So, but not a huge number of redundancies there. And then at the workshop itself, we had 30 folks there. I'm not going to go through all how that was set up. Hopefully most of you, if not all of you, were able to participate in that and remember that image on the right, which was where you had to come up with your housing plan to meet our RHNA numbers. So yeah, we had it set up to have participation in Spanish. We only heard from English language speakers in terms of the Balancing Act online tool. Most folks, about 3/4, live in Pacific Grove. 25% live elsewhere, so and most of those were in nearby zip codes. We did do a cross tabulation to look at, was there a significant difference between what we heard from how people prioritize things in terms of residents versus non-residents, and there wasn't really any significant difference in terms of where people's priorities landed. We'll talk through what those priorities were. We heard mostly from more homeowners than are represented in the citywide population. So you're about 50-50 in terms of homeowners and renters in Pacific Grove. About 1/3 of the folks worked there in Pacific Grove. 1/4 of the folks who responded have kids in the schools. Mostly older, over 50 years old, mostly white, but a mix of income levels. So this is just something we keep track of, just as we do the housing element. We're going to we're speaking to who we heard from is representative or not representative of the community at large, so that we can factor that in as we do additional outreach, if we do additional outreach on the road. And the city team's been doing some, and I'll talk a little bit about that. At the workshop itself, it's kind of similar in terms of mostly residents, mostly older, mostly white, a little more skewed towards homeowners than we had in the online. I'm flying to this, and these slides will be on the website if you want to go through, and we're also going to be sending out the links to the full Balancing Act summary. But then in addition to these things that we ran, city staff have been out talking to folks in a lot of different forums. And we talked a little bit about this in the October workshop on some of these. And that's included then in the housing element outreach summary that is part of the element. So there's sort of, and you'll find in the element when it comes to public review draft, there's a summary that's in the body of the element, and then there's a lot of details in the appendices. So there's the more detailed summaries of all this work in the appendices. And this is an important part of what the state looks at. They want to make sure that we've done a good job of hearing from folks who are affected by housing issues, and that we're connecting the dots between what people say, what their experiences are, and then what the housing element is proposing to do about those issues. So this is just a summary of some of the key themes from all that outreach. Specifically, some of the developers, and this gets into some, as we talk about the rezoning proposals, affordable housing is built a lot, not entirely, but a lot through what's called housing tax credits, low-income housing tax credits. And it's really hard to compete for those tax credits if we don't have high enough density. So that's one thing that's getting in the way of creating affordable housing outcomes specifically, is having adequate densities so that a project can not only pencil, but also compete for that limited pool of tax credit financing. There's a lot of stress out in the community, and we heard it in your opening comments about your resolutions. Stress around housing costs. People are paying a large percentage of their income on housing. They're having to live far away from where their job is. That has impacts environmentally, but also on their lives and their ability to spend time with family, as well as it creates additional costs for them. Employers are challenged to find folks and retain folks because of the housing issues. People with disabilities have particular housing challenges in terms of finding accessible housing. And there's just sort of a general feeling people are struggling with really valuing the character and natural environment of Pacific Grove, and at the same time struggling with the need for more housing and sort of how do we find the right balance. And that's really what the housing element will be seeking to do. And as we talk through the sites, identifying sites where we could create housing, more housing opportunities, specifically affordable housing opportunities, while retaining all the things that make Pacific Grove such a special place. So here's just some guiding principles that we distilled from the input received. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but these help to inform what are then the goals in the housing element. But I think most importantly is making sure as we identify sites and strategies that we're creating a diversity of housing options, not just one type of housing, you know, like apartments or higher density housing for affordable housing and then low density for everyone else, but having a mix of options. And that gets into some of the infill opportunities or ADUs and things where we can mix in a diversity of housing in existing neighborhoods, even as we create higher density housing in the areas that have the most walkability, higher transit access, and are close to jobs. And one important lens that is applied by the state when looking at the housing element and that we're applying in the development of the housing element is what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we'll talk about that as I go through. So this was the feedback specifically from Balancing Act. So where should new housing go was the question that we asked. People had to come up with a housing plan where they would identify changes to create more housing, and they couldn't submit their plan until they got to the RHNA numbers plus a buffer. So had a lot of support for increasing density in downtown, including almost, well, about a quarter of the folks saying that 100+ units per acre would be appropriate, particularly on the surface parking lots downtown for redevelopment. And about 1/5 of folks said that didn't want to see changes in density, but 80% of folks said let's increase the density in the downtown area. Central Erdely, a little less support in terms of changes to the zoning. So 33%, about a third, said let's keep things as they are, 20 units the acre, but again 2/3 said let's increase. And mostly that support for increase was in that what we were calling the medium density range in the Balancing Act tool. And then quite a bit of support for redevelopment of shopping areas in Forest Hill to mixed use, including housing. Only 6% said chose not to do change in this area. So 94% said let's make some changes, and that ranged from sort of a lower density mix to up to a higher density, because of the quarter of people saying let's do it at 60 to 80 units the acre. There's also quite a bit of support for change to zoning in what we call the close-in neighborhoods. What's your R3, R4 zones, where the potential for creating more duplexes, townhomes, smaller apartment buildings. 20% said they didn't want to see those changes. 80% had it from either some change to a lot of change that through those tools that they supported. A lot of support for ADUs, either continuing the current trend, which you're in there like 25 to 30 ADUs a year, or even working to increase that trend. And then more of a mix in terms of the thinking on the lot splits. 17% put it as a low priority, and 36% didn't want to see it as a priority, but about half said let's look at lot splits as a way to create more housing. And just on those three things there, as we go into the sites conversation, understand we're not going to, even if we said, let's aggressively pursue some of these, we're not going to see a lot of numbers in an 8-year period. We could do some changes that would really show our support for seeing these kinds of outcomes, but in terms of how the market responds, you're seeing 1-2 units sort of at a time from a single property. In most cases, unless it's a small apartment development. So you're not going to get a ton of numbers in terms of meeting the RHNA, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And again, it creates that diversity of housing opportunities in existing neighborhoods for a range of incomes. So then we had some other things that were more site specific, and you'll see this goes from at the top are several things that people supported generally, but at different ranges of sort of how much change. So we had a couple school sites where it wasn't like the housing would be developed on the entire site, but that you might take a portion of that site, look at developing housing and either preserving or also replacing the existing. So, building a new school building or expanding the school use, but also introducing housing. So there's support for those. I'll talk a little bit about these sites when I go through the sites inventory. A little more of a mixed consensus on Lighthouse Avenue opportunity sites and the Pacific Grove Community Center site, and quite a lot of opposition to what we had there as sort of a general statement of what about building some housing on a small portion of open space, and there was not much support for that. So that's a quick summary of the Balancing Act and outreach input. Any questions on that before I dive into the next parts of the agenda?
That was very interesting, David.
Yep.
To see the results.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to go through them. And we've set it up in a CODA table. You'll be able to go through and each see the responses to each one and who responded. So you'll be able to play around with those and explore in more detail. But any other questions, comments? Go through. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the housing element is your community statement about what's important to you for housing and sets forth goals, policies, and programs, which we call the housing plan. That's the last segment there, housing plan for 2023-2031 for an 8-year period. So as we do this analysis, we're going to be looking at what really could be accomplished during that 8 years. As you know, we've talked previously, housing element law has changed quite a bit since the last time you did your housing element in 2015. There's a lot more requirements. There's a number of things that we're doing in the housing element that are just meeting state law requirements in terms of what needs to be in there. So the whole front section, one of the things that's important that we've been going back and forth with staff on is evaluating your current element, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are the lessons learned, what are we taking out, what might we need to or want to change in order to respond to current conditions. But that's our starting point, is your current element. We have a summary of the new laws and how that plays into the current, the updated element. And then there's this pretty significant piece on analyzing your housing needs. One of the big new requirements this round is the fair housing assessment, which is they call affirmatively furthering fair housing, where we identify patterns of segregation, housing discrimination, and things you're going to be working on to counter those. We do an analysis of constraints on housing production. One of the things we've been waiting on, we put together a survey that AMBAG's been helping to carry out on fees and standards around the AMBAG region, so that we have a point of comparison in terms of how Pacific Grove is doing relative to others. Are our fees higher? Are they about the same? Are they lower? So we're helping to compile that, and then will be one section of the element. That's one of the ones we're continuing to work on, and that'll have the discussion of water, which is a big issue. And then the thing I'm going to talk mostly about today is this fourth section, which is the resources to support housing, and specifically your sites inventory. I'll talk more about that. But then the housing plan is where we set forth the goals and policies. We're identifying 6 goal areas. They build off what you have in your current element. They change the order a little bit, and what we're doing is changing some of the language. So HCD is less interested in what they might call vague language, like support doing this or encourage that, to much more specific, like actionable things that you can measure whether you did it or not. So it's hard to measure whether you really supported it, but you can measure whether you adopted a policy or put in place a program. So that's going to need to be more specific than it was in your last element. Although you did a really good job of implementing things that were in your last element, there was a few things that did not get done, but anyway, we'll be pointing to those things and then being more specific in the current element or the updated element. And I'm happy to answer questions here. I know, Claudia, you said you had some specific questions. And then maybe we can start talking about the big moves in terms of the sites of what we're looking at proposing. Any questions on the element, just sort of outline and what's in it, going to be in it? I know it's pretty high level.
I did have a question.
Sure.
I'm gonna be sort of the dog with the bone, and seeing how our housing element and the focused general plan going to mold together. So if the general plan and the housing element disagree on zoning, and identified areas are not in agreement, how are we going to rectify that?
So it's not unusual for a housing element to be adopted with what's called a program to rezone. It says we're going to change our zoning in X, Y, and Z ways in these locations in order to facilitate the outcomes identified in the element. So we will have a program to rezone and some other programs related to policy changes that are in the element with a timeline. And included in that will be an update to the land use element of the general plan. And then there's a timeline. So under current state law, you have 3 years to implement those changes. Any program to rezone, you have 3-year timeline from adoption from that due date of December 15th, 2023 to implement those changes. If we don't hit the deadline of December 15th, 2023, then you have a 1-year timeline.
Right.
With those changes.
Okay.
That's one change that's in state law this time around, that you have that 1-year clock that starts ticking. We're not too concerned about that because, and Anastasia can give an update, but you're in the process of hiring a consultant to do the general plan changes and the changes to zoning. So we're pretty confident you'll meet that deadline, even if it was a 1 year, but we expect to have our work done by the 15th. So you'll have an adopted element. It'll say there's a program to rezone. Developments that come in are going to be reviewed based on the zoning you have in place. So because one of the part of that change in zoning is also doing the CEQA analysis, the California Environmental Quality Act analysis. So they'll need to complete that, then implement the zoning changes, and then at that point you'll have consistency because the housing element says you're going to do this, and then you'll have done it. Does that make sense?
So basically what you're saying is the housing element is going to be a little less prescriptive, whereas the general plan is going to be more prescriptive. I mean, that's
well, the general plan. Well, the zoning implements the general plan land use. Land use element needs to be updated to reflect what we say in the housing element. But the housing elements have to be fairly prescriptive because we're not going to get buy-off from HCD unless we're very specific about what we're putting in place to facilitate the outcomes. Why we think these sites are going to have this kind of housing within the 8-year period. So my question is, are you going to be collaborating with the Rincon folks if they're the ones that get chosen to do this, so that we have
collaboration. That's what my concern is, that
Yeah.
you might say one thing and they might disagree. And I'm just looking to see how are we going to have collaboration? And I know we have a super, super tight schedule, and nobody's been selected yet or contracted, but it's a huge concern.
Catherine, I see you have your hand up. I'll ask Anastasia to respond on the timing. We're excited to have a consultant on board to do that, because we definitely want to collaborate with them, because we're going to be putting things in the housing that says, here's how we should approach this, and here's the densities, and we want their review of that and buy-in, so that
Okay.
there's no surprises for them, like, where did this come from? I can't.
Yeah, that was what my concern was, is you make a recommendation and they're scratching their heads going, well, where'd that come from? I was hoping for collaboration.
Yeah, Anastasia, you want to speak to that, and then Catherine, I'll take the question.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be collaboration between the two. It's very common, housing elements are updated every 8 years and general plans aren't updated quite as often. So we're in a good situation where we're able to be updating our housing element and then flow that into a general plan update. And I think we need to plan for the future too, that this general plan update will probably cover a couple more housing element cycles. And so we really want to be thinking ahead as we move forward. So even as we're going through this process right now and looking at, okay, how many units are we going to think about? And it's a lot, 1,125 with a buffer, that we may want to think about even more. So definitely we have discussed this with our potential candidate for our general plan update, and they're aware and willing to continue the work that is done for this housing element update in this cycle. Thank you.
Catherine. Nope, you're muted.
Sorry.
I'm going to stop sharing screen just so I can see people.
Okay. I was, just thinking through timing all these things. It sounds like it could be up to 3 years past the adoption of the housing element before we see zoning that could really put things into action. Otherwise, we're just all going to be sitting on our hands waiting around. Is there a way to implement some kind of bold or sweeping statement in the housing element to say, until a zoning code is updated, the housing element rules? I've seen that happen in specific plans. If the specific plan might be in conflict with, say, the zoning code or the general plan or both, it'll say within the specific plan that document is the governing document. Is there an opportunity for that, so that we don't waste between 1 and 3 years waiting around for that implementation?
So it'll have pretty bold statements in the housing element, and once it's adopted, it's part of your general plan. The challenge is on the specific of the rezoning, absent having, in some areas, it'll be less of an issue. In some of the particularly areas that were substantially rezoning, you have to do the Environmental Quality Act analysis to enact that rezoning. So you'll have statements there that says you want to see affordable housing, and they're within certain parameters. You'd have a legislative path to approve development. But if you start bumping up against environmental constraint issues, then that'd be a question for your city attorney, not for your housing element consultant. But yeah. Is that, Catherine, anything else? Or okay, let's see, Luke.
Hi, Dave. Regarding the scope of the general plan zoning, as far as the number of units, dwelling units that'll be accommodated, I heard Anastasia mention, and I guess this is more of a question for Anastasia, but deciding what that number is going to be, whether we go for the 1125 plus 30% buffer or 5,000 units, which I've heard Anastasia mention. When is that scope or that number actually going to be defined? And is that going to come to council for decision? I mean, that's going to drive a lot of things like the CEQA analysis so that number has to be decided on fairly early. And I'm just wondering how and when that's going to happen.
I'll just jump in. I never said 5,000 units, but just saying that we need to think about future.
I heard that in a previous presentation
Okay.
with Rincon.
Okay, I don't know what the state, this is dependent on what the state determines for RENA, but I think we need to really, I want to set the city up as well as we can in this general plan update, and to think about how the city, you know, the RENA number we received this cycle, and what may happen in the next couple of cycles for this general plan update. We're looking at a general plan update that should cover about 20 years, right? So we don't know what the state will give us. Maybe they'll cut back on the next RENA. Maybe they'll, you know, who knows what they'll do. We can't predict that. But what we can do is just do our best to be looking at, are we accommodating what we need this cycle, what may happen in the future, and really looking at the potential of what we can do as a community to support housing development where we think it is needed in our community, and support a vibrant community, like really looking at a whole, like these areas that David looked at, that we looked at in our housing tool. So I think there's a lot we can do to be proactive and to really make our community what we want it to. So it's a great opportunity for us to really look toward the future right now.
Okay, but my question was, we've got to decide on the scope of the number of the units.
Well,
And
just
and I'm just wondering where that decision point is going to be made. And you know, there are a lot of things in play right now. In fact, there's a proposed initiative that's going to try to get qualified for a statewide ballot measure to actually take local zoning, local land use decisions and make it a local concern, not a statewide concern. So what I'm wondering here is, we don't know the future. We do know we have this 6th cycle number that we've been given, and what is the scope for our for the number of units that we're going to try to incorporate into our general plan update. And I want to know who's going to make that decision and when that's going to happen, because that affects a lot of other processes downstream, like CEQA analysis, et cetera. So I imagine that's going to come to council, but I'd like some confirmation on that.
So Luke, if I could just, a couple of things. One is, most jurisdictions have zoning well above what they have on the ground today or will ever see in the future, because even though you put zoning in place, most people don't respond to the additional zoning that's there. And there's a whole set of reasons. An individual property owner, or what's on the ground today is valuable, or they just don't want to go through the pain of the process. So, you know, as we talk about in the housing, we're going to be recommending changes to your zoning, like in your downtown commercial zone or in the Forest Hill commercial zoning. But in our inventory of sites, we're not getting anywhere close to including every downtown site in our housing inventory, because we don't think in the 8-year period that most of them will see any kind of redevelopment at all. So we have a small number of downtown parcels that we're going to be highlighting and saying, here's our housing inventory list where we think realistically we would see redevelopment within the next 8 years. And we have to provide quite a bit of evidence of why we think that'll happen, and what zoning and things we have in place to facilitate. There's going to be a bunch of properties that we've changed the zoning on that we don't expect anything to happen in 8 years. And this is where, to the point that was made earlier, yeah, we're looking forward to having your general plan consultant on to figure out how do they do the analysis for the general plan, because even on a 20-year horizon, anything that has a historic structure on it and other things are not likely to redevelop even in a 20-year time frame. Even
Understood.
Theoretically, so it's this sort of, there's a theoretical capacity, like,
yeah,
you know, I've got 20 acres and you can build 100 units. Well, it's theoretical.
Well, I understand everything you've mentioned, and thank you for that. What I'm hearing though also is that we're contemplating perhaps a more expansive set of zoning for density, basically for our general plan update. And I'm thinking the land use element, not necessarily the housing element. And who decided we're going to do that? You know, and when is that decision going to get made? Is that going to get made? Yes, council wants to pursue a more expansive general plan update, focused general plan update, or do we just want to accommodate the growth or the planning that's been kind of given to us via this 6th cycle? So that's a question I think I'd like to get an answer on at some point. Maybe not here, and I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Gabe. I'm sorry, do you go by Gabriel or Gabe?
Usually Gabe. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I respond to Gabriel or hey. But the question I have is related to the extra capacity that you might zone for, and whether that is explicitly related to trying to get that pro-housing designation because of all of the benefits that it offers to cities that attain it. And I think that to Councilman Coletti's question, there might be benefits to that would justify doing so for the city, that would take some of the burden off of the city in terms of access to funding. So I'm wondering if that's part of the thinking right now, and whether that's something you're planning for through the general plan update as well.
Gabe, I'll just answer that really quick. I have contacted the state about the pro-housing designation, and we'll keep looking into it. It's a pretty big process. At the time I contacted them, I think only Salinas in our region had obtained it. And so it's quite a process. So we'll continue to look at it for sure.
Great. And Elizabeth.
Yeah, more of a general zoning question from my end, but last week I attended a Capitola Planning Commission meeting where their consultant was talking about their housing element process. And it was the first time I had heard of a minimum 6-month review period by the Coastal Commission for any rezoning that's done under the housing element. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on that, and if Pacific Grove would be subject to any of those same requirements.
So that would be through rezoning. So we're not going to be adopting the rezoning. We're going to be giving direction for the rezoning in the element with the program to rezone. And Anastasia, in terms of the Coastal Commission process for that, do you have any information?
That's good to hear, Liz. I hadn't heard that before, what their timing is, but they tend to take quite a bit of time to review things. So I think we'll have to take that into account when we get to the zoning.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to jump in. I'm going to go back to
Just a quick, I just want to let Luke know too, I hear his concerns that, we, the city, are not creating more units for us or expanding the scope of anything with the general plan update or with this housing element. We're just wanting to think about the future and look at the future and what could happen by a state RHNA mandate. Like, this is something that we just need to keep in mind, that we never expected 1,125 units. So as we go through the land use and updating our general plan, we need to keep that in mind, that this is what happened this cycle, what could happen in the future. And we don't want to have to spend another $1 million, or so to rezone in the future. We've got to be very forward thinking. That's all there is to it. We're not, saying, oh, let's think about 20,000 units right now. And I said 20,000 is it's not a serious number. It's just, what do we really need to project so that we really get what we need out of this housing, or this general plan update and this housing element update? That's all.
I understand, and thank you, but this is going to be a big piece of pie to slice to begin with, and creating an even bigger piece. And you're right, the future is uncertain. I mean, the whole RHNA thing can all get upset, based on this citizen or this initiative that I've talked about. So there's all sorts of possibilities, and whether you plan for a more expansive set of zoning standards or densities, that dealing with RHNA 6th cycle seems to be enough of a heavy lift to begin with. And so my question simply is who is going to define that scope? And is that going to come to council, or And I guess that's, again, that's something that's going to come forward when RenCon or whoever is fully on board and that process starts. But it's just something I've raised before, and I'll probably raise it again. And I'm just something that I'm thinking about. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We will definitely have that. Planning Commission and Council will both see any types of updates like that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump into walking through the sites inventory. And per the conversation we just had, this is focusing in on the next 8 years. So this table has your regional housing needs allocation by income category. And I do want to call out, although we do not get a number from the state or AMDAG for what's called extremely low income, in the housing element itself, we do need to speak to that and make sure that we have sites to help facilitate units for extremely low income. That's 30% of AMI and below. The very low income is 50% and below of area median income. And when I say things that you don't understand, please raise your hand and I'll explain it, because we get into a lot of acronyms in this business. And and I'm going to speak up more loudly because I heard that people are having a hard time hearing me. So if you can't hear me well, also just raise your hand or speak up and I'll up my volume. The one thing we've talked about before is the need for, or our recommendation for, a buffer. And the reason for that is there is now a state law called the No Net Loss Law that says you need to keep your inventory of sites for the entire 8-year planning period to meet your RHNA numbers in every income category. So if we were to say, hey, we've got 10 sites that are going to be suitable for helping us meet our very low income housing number, and half of those sites get developed with high-end housing, or not with housing at all, but with like an office building or something, then we need to find 5 more sites to make up for that now lack of an inventory. So we'd like for you to avoid having to do that. So as we develop the inventory, we are looking to have a buffer. And you'll see in this table, we are recommending that we weight that buffer towards the lower income, because it's more likely that you might lose a site to higher income housing that we thought might be low income housing, and that we have enough sites to meet that need. So we're applying a 30% buffer to the lower end categories, 10% in the above moderate category. Overall, it comes to a 20% buffer, but it's just weighted as we look at each of the sites and come up with the inventory. Any questions on that before I go forward? Yep. Okay, so these areas should be fairly familiar because they're the areas that we asked for input on in the Balancing Act tool. Other locations is a fairly big category, and we'll talk through that. One thing that we have in this, so we have enough sites in this based on our current analysis to meet that RHNA number plus buffer without including site. Sorry, Rosemary, I think you're unmuted or someone.
Am I?
Yeah, well, okay, we're fine. So we're not including in this current inventory any sites that would require a voter change. So you've got sites that we had actually a number of them in the Balancing Act tool that you currently have a voter restriction. So they're anything that's zoned U or O in your zoning would require an act of the voters to see housing development on those sites. We're not including any of those sites in this inventory, although we do recommend that we have them in the housing element and have a program about working to remove those restrictions, because we do think some of them are pretty promising housing sites, and some of them, like the CalAm site, actually have quite a bit of potential development for housing available to them if the zoning were changed, but we're not including those in this inventory. So we need to meet or exceed the RHNA target. We're not going to get a certified element without doing that. We cannot reuse sites from the previous sites inventory unless we have evidence that says conditions have changed. And even though it didn't develop in the last 8 years or in the last 16 years, we think it's magically going to redevelop now. Just in terms of what we're looking at here, we will not be able to reach your, we've talked about this before, you're not going to reach your targets without rezoning. So we're definitely looking at the need to rezone. And as we look at the sites, we want to make sure that we're doing that work of affirmatively furthering fair housing to not put all of our affordable housing in one part of town, and to work to create more fair and accessible housing for all income levels. And that was a required part of the analysis. We will have a part of the housing element that speaks to our analysis of our sites inventory from a fair housing perspective. So an important term to understand, wrap your head around, is realistic capacity. So like I said earlier, you know, you have a 1 acre site and we say you can build 100 units on it. Well, rare is the case that you actually see 100 units. In a lot of cases, you'll see maybe 80% utilization of the site because of a number of factors that come to play related to development standards or site conditions that make it hard to develop the entire site. So we're doing the work to identify the realistic capacity, and the numbers that I've shared with you are based on our current estimate of realistic capacity, and we're refining those. And this is where, hopefully working with your general plan consultant as we go through the process in the coming months, we'll be refining those further. And we expect there'll be some back and forth with HCD to land on something that they believe is realistic. And that needs to be grounded in expressions of market interest and market feasibility. So there are some sites that developers have expressed interest in. That's super helpful to us to actually say, look, we think that's likely to redevelop because people are already interested in it. They're talking to the city. Some of them times there's been a proposal or a preliminary kind of conversation with a proposal that we can point to. Other forms of evidence is just economic analysis to show that the economics are there to make something feasible, or changes in standards where we've tipped the scales in favor of a housing outcome versus something else. So just back to this table, I'm going to walk through each one of these areas and talk a little bit about and show you a map of the sites. I'm happy to talk through any specifics, but I'm going to start with downtown. So we've identified 31 parcels that many of them lend themselves to what we call assemblage. So you take several parcels, you put them together and you do development on those parcels. And in determining that, it's based on some adjacent ownerships, either sometimes the same property owner, or in a few cases, this is the map that shows the downtown parcels that we're planning to put into the site's inventory. The ones that are checked are city-owned properties, currently surface parking lots. And in some cases, there's already been a conversation with the adjacent property owner about the potential to assemble those properties and do a joint development across the parcels. So even though we've got 31 parcels, we're looking at 14 real kind of potential sites where housing could be created during the 8-year period. I want to talk about a key concept here that we've been working on, which is you would create base zoning and then adopt a local affordable housing overlay, which would establish a local density bonus in order to incentivize the creation of affordable units. So it would be an increase in the zoning from what's there today, but we would expect development to actually happen at higher than the zoned density because people would be taking advantage of the affordable housing overlay, the density bonus. And the reason for doing this is to get to those numbers that we have for those lower income, moderate and lower income housing units. So one thing I think we heard a lot in the outreach period is that we don't want to see a lot of large high-end housing with no affordability. So what we want to do is create a way in which you're incentivizing people to create those affordable units with even up to 100% density bonus for 100% affordable projects. So it would be a tiered density bonus, say you do 30% of the units as affordable, you get, these aren't the exact numbers, 30% density bonus in return for that. So you'd also have changes in development standards and, importantly, a streamlined review. The thing that kills affordable housing developments is going through like a 2 or 3 year review process, which makes it really hard to get the LIHTC funding lined up and makes your costs go through the roof. And someone who knows a lot about affordable housing has their hand up, so I'm going to call on you, Jane. Question or comment?
I do have a question. Is the, I don't know if you're dealing with this in your report and what Anastasia might say, but specific plans really assist in getting affordable housing developed because it takes the CEQA process out of play. And so have you been discussing that with Anastasia, or Anastasia, can you comment on that? Because I think these kind of go hand in hand.
Anastasia, you want to speak to that?
Jane, are you talking about having more specific plans with CEQA completed, or?
So the city would do a specific plan on a certain area, the downtown specific plan, for instance, and they would be very specific about what the densities were, the how many stories, you know, if you're building a 4-story, does it get set back after 1 or 2 or 3 stories, windows, et cetera. You get very specific so that a project can come in as long as they meet that specific plan, then they're good to go forward and don't have to go through their own individual CEQA.
Right, that's definitely something we can consider as we move through this update and the general plan update. I think we need to get through the general plan. While we're in discussions with the general plan update, we can talk about that for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely, I mean, I would envision it as the CEQA that's going to be done for the general plan and rezoning would be taking into account these. So the CEQA would be done for the density bonuses that are in the policy. I see that there was another hand up, but I'm having a hard time seeing who it is. Is there another hand up?
Oh, I don't know how to do the hand.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I see a thumbs up from Catherine on specific plans or other mechanisms to remove CEQA barriers. Good. Okay. Okay, so we're looking, and one of the other things that's in the proposal is to establish what we call a minimum density. So that would be to head off the loss of these sites to a lower density development. So in order to ensure that we get some density and some affordability, it would require that you do development at a minimum of 30 dwelling units per acre. And then again, would have a base zoning. We're currently looking at 45 units to the acre with a bonus above that for creating affordability. Also, another proposal that's embedded in this is that you would have more development capacity by doing a mixed use development than doing just commercial. So it's a way to incentivize, encourage people to do mixed use rather than just do an office building and we lose something to all commercial development that we thought would be a housing site. Luke.
Thank you. This number of dwelling units per acre kind of triggered something regarding condominium developments. There's currently a chapter in our code 2345 that limits the density of condominium developments and height. There's a lot of development standards actually specified, but it was done by citizen initiative. And I'm wondering if that is being taken into consideration here.
We've talked about it, and it may be something that we, again, have a program that talks about changing the voter restrictions. Most of this that we're looking at would be rental housing development, would be our expectation.
I have a
Yeah, because
question.
the condominium development standards are it's just 25% above the nearest residential district, R1 district. So
right, the proposal would change the way in which you manage density in the downtown. So it wouldn't be based on adjacent, it would be establishing a minimum density of 30 and up to 45.
right, and that's what triggered because the way the initiative was written, and again, it's chapter 2345, it relies on the density of the nearest R1 district to establish the zoning density for that condominium development.
Right. Okay, well, we'll look further into that. I mean, we're expecting that these would be rental, but we can look at in terms of pathways for ownership.
Yeah, I'm hoping that too, by the way. So thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
A couple of the parcels that I noted that were crosshatched, meaning they were owned by the city, they don't have water meters.
Right.
So what are we going to do about that?
So that's why the assemblage is key. So each one of those is part of an assemblage, well, except for the one, there is one that has a water meter, the one that doesn't show an assemblage, the one in the upper left. And then the other three have adjacent properties that have water meters, that there has been expressions, at least on two of them, expressions of interest from the property owner for a joint redevelopment.
Okay.
And we know that there's not enough water. We have water issues, as we know. And so there's no way we would get through this without just kind of setting that aside to some degree as we move forward with this. Like, we know ADUs, most likely people can take measures within their own household to upgrade their plumbing and toilets and everything, but water continues to be something that we're making the state aware of, and that we're doing our very best to plan with that in consideration.
Right. So on the waterfront in the element, there's an analysis of that as a constraint and the work that's being done to address that constraint, which is not through the housing element, but through other processes that we'll point to. And then also have a policy that says we're going to prioritize the city's housing allocations for affordable housing whenever possible.
So it's
Okay.
basically, we have to do a workaround until water becomes available. Okay, thank you.
So the reason that those sites were identified as for being in the inventory is because they do have those water meters on adjacent properties that we think it's conceivable that we could do a joint development. That would be doable within an 8-year period. Yep.
But my concern is currently we're constrained of getting bigger water meters to put on properties, and that is also a huge issue.
Yeah.
Catherine, yes, we're taking that into account as well.
Okay. Peggy and then Luke. Peggy?
Yes, my question is this, if you use parking lot areas like behind the theater and such, are you planning on underground parking in order to make sure that there is enough parking for multifamily type or condo type facilities? Because one of the things I'm seeing with the ADUs is the requirement of on-site parking going away, which means more people parking on the streets, and if we do that with multifamily as well, I'm just wondering what the overlay thought process is to ensure everyone that lives on a site has parking available in a reasonable zone.
I don't know if Anastasia, you want to say anything about the theater lot, but I know some of the preliminary looks at that site has included parking. Not just for the housing, I believe also for the downtown district. But I mean, I've looked at that site. It's a fantastic site, partially because of the topography. It would make it very easy to do it would not even be underground. It's basically you'd have the parking on the lower level and housing built above because of the slope on the site. Luke.
Hi, sorry, but Dave, I think on this map, the street identifiers are all offset one to the right. So 17th Street is really 16th Street, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, we'll look at that.
because if 17th Street caught my eye because you mentioned that, that property in the upper left,
Right.
That would be Chautauqua Hall. So
Right.
That could have been my mistake. Apologies there.
no worries. I thought I was ready to blame Google.
That's a good catch though. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to, because yeah, we're running short on time. Central Erdley. So this is an area that has a number of properties that we think could be included in the inventory. As you are aware, there's a large hotel development that is proposed. I know it's not through the process, but that would be a significant change in the built character of that area. And there are a number of sites here that could rezone. It would be a similar approach to the downtown commercial properties of a minimum density, a base zoning range, and then a bonus above that based on affordable housing overlay. This is the map of the sites. The blue hashed is the hotel development. The parcels outlined in pink are currently commercial or institutional use that we believe could be candidates for housing redevelopment within the 8-year period. And that the rezoning would be a pretty significant incentive for those properties to redevelop. And some of them, there's groupings, actually, there are some assemblages where their properties are already under the same ownership that are adjacent to each other. So you could do a assemblage that would lend itself to a scale for redevelopment. Don.
Does the state now require that we talk to property owners before listing a site on the inventory?
We're planning to send them a letter to let them know that we're listing on the inventory, and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on that? So again, so both downtown and this, the rezoning would be for a larger area. These are the sites that we think lend themselves to be listed in the inventory as candidate sites for redevelopment in the 8-year period. Yeah. Yeah.
And just gonna note the property at the north east corner of Central and Dewey has just had a non-housing project approved for that property.
Okay, this one here or further up?
This one, the one on the left of the two.
Oh, this
Yeah,
one.
we talked about that, David, when we were going through this. Yeah.
Okay, Josh, make a note. Okay.
Thank you.
Forest Hill is an interesting area. These are much larger parcels, some of them, not all of them, than other parts of town. Well, there are some places that have housing, but very, very limited housing. Some of these, like the Country Club Shopping Center site, lend themselves to redevelopment with a mix of housing and commercial. So we have lower densities in this area than we're proposing in the downtown, but still sort of, introducing a pretty significant change to the area. And also just we use what's called a realistic capacity multiplier in terms of how much of the site might redevelop. So we have a lower multiplier in these sites in terms of coming up with projected units. It's still a fairly high number of units, but understand this is across 28 acres of potential site, whereas downtown is, I think, about 6 acres of site. So it's a large number of units comparatively, but a much larger area, so a lower density. That's the area. We would be including all the areas in the rezone, and then we've got some areas that would be need to be assembled. Some of them are under same ownership again as they based on our current inventory. Sorry, Don.
What assumptions are we making about existing height limits?
So through the overlay, you would have a change. You'd qualify for a change in height.
Thank you.
That would vary from downtown to Forest Hill. So there'll be subsections of the overlay that change development standards in each of the areas, but in return for affordability. Okay, I got 9 minutes, so I'm going to fly. So there's a number of other sites, and I'm not going to go through each of them individually. You'll see in the 4th bullet here, some of them listed. There's a site next to the First United Methodist Church. Pebble Beach Company has a couple sites. There's what we're calling the Victorian Mansion that's at 17 Mile Drive and Lighthouse. Not expecting high density in these sites, but some pretty significant development potential for housing, totaling 289 units across 17 acres, 18 sites. We're also including a small number of units from the change to the R3, R4 zoning to facilitate middle housing outcomes. But like I said earlier, those are not going to be a large number of units, even though they might affect a large number of parcels. Those kinds of redevelopments come through on a 1-by-1, and we're not going to be identifying specific parcels in the inventory. It'll be like ADUs. We have a policy. We facilitate these as outcomes, and we expect X% of the properties to come through in the 8-year period. And we have to provide a rationale why we think that's the case. But again, it's not going to be a significant part of the inventory. ADUs is basically the state allows a different approach where we take what we've been seeing and we multiply by 8, and that gives us the number of ADUs that we can claim in the inventory. Sorry to be going so fast, but I want to get to talking about schedule and next steps. Any questions on these? That's the map. They're all over the place, but you'll see the ones down in that lower left are that's the First United, Mission, Linen, and the 2 Pebble Beach properties, which have a pretty significant acreage. We wouldn't expect that every part of that be redeveloped, but that has a pretty significant housing potential in an area that's adjacent to residential. And then there's the sites requiring voter approval. I'm not going to go through those, but you can see them listed. There's a couple BVSD sites that have been in part of the conversation for a while now. There was quite a bit of support for redevelopment of a portion of those sites in the.
That's PGUSD, isn't it, Dave?
I'm sorry, PG. Yes, thank you. That would be Boulder Valley School. That's not where we're at. That's in my head. So we'd have to get a voter approval where we think that's an obstacle, but we do think it's worth working on these sites during the 8-year period to set them up for your next inventory. And that's where those sites are located. So again, that's the summary. It definitely weights units towards the downtown in terms of density, because you got 6 acres that would be supporting 340 units. Introduces housing in that central early commercial district through redevelopment, which I know would be a significant change from what's there today. But we think it's an appropriate place for housing and for density, particularly with the hotel project going in. It's close to jobs. And then we've got Forest Hill, which would be a significant change to the character of that area, introducing housing redevelopment in more of a mixed use form and a lower density than downtown. Those are the current numbers that we're looking at. It gets us to the RHNA plus the buffer. It leaves some properties on the table. Obviously, there's going to be refinements as we go forward. We do have more work in terms of putting the evidence together. We know that's going to get a lot of scrutiny from HCD. There may be some things that don't come through the other side. So we have a few things in our back pocket if we need to pull them forward. But we're putting the draft together based on what you're seeing today. Other thoughts, feedback before I jump into talking about the schedule?
Are you going to go over a process for project approvals and whether or not that changes under this housing element proposal?
So what's the affordable housing overlay includes for projects that qualify that are delivering affordability would receive a streamlined review process. So the city is going to be developing objective standards as part of that contract to do the general plan and rezoning. So projects that qualify based on delivering affordability would receive a streamlined review using those objective standards.
Okay, and what's the cutoff, or is there a cutoff threshold for income on that affordable housing overlay? Is it median income or somewhere less than that?
It'd basically be taking a structure similar to what's in state law, but bumping up percentages. So you have it tiered, you get higher for the lower income, and then reducing for middle and moderate income.
Okay, love to dig into that offline if there's a written draft of that.
Well, yeah, the draft will be coming out. We didn't share the draft with you because we want the public review draft to be the public review draft, and once we send it out, that's the public review draft. So let's talk a little bit about the schedule. So here's what the steps in the process are. So we're working with the staff to put together you're getting the big ideas, big moves, and you saw the sneak peek of the actual sites. That'll all be presented in the public review draft of the housing element. We're shooting for a March distribution of that. So that starts the clock ticking on a 30-day review period. We would have meetings within that review period to receive verbal comments, and then also people can submit written comments. We take into account those comments. We are actually required by the state to take 10 days to look at those comments, respond to them, or say thank you very much. And then we would be looking for council, not a formal action, but correction on then submitting that draft to HCD. That's not a required step, but we definitely want to be sending a draft that the council thinks is a supportable draft. HCD has 90 days to look at that draft and give us comments. We have a meeting with them during that period. In fact, we're meeting with them now just to run by some ideas, just make sure that how we're doing things they will support, or if they have concerns, hear them now. But that 90-day period is a formal review period. They send us a letter. They either say, we find that your element's in substantial compliance, or they say, we think you need to do some additional changes, some additional analysis is needed. We expect that we will get a letter asking for additional analysis. Most jurisdictions are. And then we have time to turn that around. And then the second submittal would be on a 60-day clock with them. We'd get a letter back from them. Again, we're looking for a letter that says we're in substantial compliance prior to December 15th, so that the council can adopt an element that is found to be in substantial compliance. The actual formal certification happens after adoption. You send it back to the state. Here's our adopted element that you looked at before and you found in substantial compliance. And then they do a formal certification. And yeah, the raw public comments will be available to all. You'll be able to look through those and then also how we responded to them. Elizabeth.
Yeah, just on the note of certification, and on the point too, I forget who brought this up in the email chain, but if you could just fully bake out what's going on with self-certification in the Bay Area. My understanding is some cities were pursuing it to avoid the builder's remedy, but legally, is there any such standing?
So state law for many years has had the option of a local jurisdiction self-certifying their elements, basically saying, here's our findings. We believe we are in substantial compliance with state housing element law. So builder's remedy it's actually not a term that's in state law, but it's what people have been referring to, something that's in the Housing Accountability Act that says, it's basically, and this has been around for a while, state law that basically was called the sort of anti-NIMBY law that says, hey, if you got a development that's been proposed in your jurisdiction that includes affordable housing, there's only 5 ways in which you can say that find denial for that development. And it has 5 things listed there. And I can send around, or I think it went to the full group already, the builder's remedy summary that ABAG put out. And one of those says you can find it in denial if it's not in compliance with your general plan and zoning. But then it says if you don't have a housing element that's been certified, found in substantial compliance, then you can't use that as a finding for denial. There are 4 other ways in which you can have a finding of denial, but they're very specific, very narrow. So there's been concern, and there's been a couple high-profile cases where developers come in under what they call the builder's remedy and said, okay, I'm going to apply to build this development regardless of your zoning because you don't have a housing element that's in compliance. It's not my call, it'll be your city's attorney's call. If we get to December 15th and we've not had a letter from HCDs and that we're in substantial compliance with our draft element, then there would be an option that the city could say, well, we're going to certify and say that we are in substantial compliance. And a few jurisdictions in the Bay Area have done that. I would say out of abundance of caution by their city attorneys to head off what they would say the builder's remedy is. They're still, the ones that I know of that have gone through that process, they're still pursuing certification with the state. So they're not doing it as a way to say, we're not complying with the state. They're still going through that process, but they're just concerned about developments coming in. At the end of the day, it would all be determined by the courts in terms of whether you actually were in substantial compliance if you self-certified, or if or you denied the development that claimed that builder's remedy. Luke.
Thanks, Dave. Real quick question on the builder's remedy. My understanding is if a jurisdiction doesn't meet by year 4, halfway through the cycle, doesn't actually construct or hasn't shown progress such that half of the units have been built, builder's remedy kicks in at that point too. Is that true?
One of them is based on you're not meeting your RENA. I think it's in the first case of the, I have to go back and look at it, but I mean, you've actually hit your RENA for everything but the very low income in your current. So you're in your current element, you wouldn't be subject, except if it was a development that had for very low income. Don, sorry, I'm just your comment about planning commission. Planning commission will be a recommending body. So in terms of when the element is ready for adoption, it'll go to the planning commission first and then to the city council. I believe I'm correct on that. Anastasia can correct me if I'm wrong, but sorry for running through things so quickly here, but I really appreciate the comments. If you have any follow-up comments, thoughts after the meeting, please reach out via email. I'm happy to answer further questions. And we're going to continue working with staff. Again, like I said, we've got a work session with HCD folks to get their input on the way we're planning to approach some of these things. It's a little tricky when we've got base zoning, but then an affordable housing overlay density bonus in terms of how we count capacity and that realistic capacity number with them. But anyhow, thanks very much, especially those of you who are bedridden or not feeling well. And yes, there'll be a notification that goes out to all of you and to the community at wide. We'll be getting the word out every way we can as soon as the draft is released. We'll look for that in March. Okay.
David, can you share the presentation with the group? I know we always put everything up on our website after, but we're happy to load that on our website.
Yeah, well, I can make a PDF and send it out to this group, and then Anastasia, you or Angela get it up on the website. We'll also post the recording, and then Josh and Victor have been taking notes, so we'll have also the summary of notes with the responses to questions. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.